Hello, I want to explain briefly why I named my channel Finding My Voice. My I will include videos with about my favorite recipes, maybe some favorite products, maybe some opinions about what's going on today. But I'm also going to include stories about my past, about how I survived, about resilience, and how I've just talk about my healing journey, and about how my past still affects me today. I was 4 months old when my mother married her husband. He adopted me when I was less than 18 months old, and I was 18 months old when their son was born. I don't remember a time really when we had peace in our home. I remember early on, from the very beginning, uh, from the moment I have my first memory, the strife and yelling and fighting and arguing. Um, and as I got older, it, the smell of alcohol permeated our home in the evenings. It was a very, very small home. And so he was an alcoholic. My mother's husband was an alcoholic, and he was also a Marine, which didn't help matters. But I witnessed and experienced things that no child should experience. I was not allowed to defend myself. I was not even taught how to defend myself. And on top of that, the abuse at home, I was also experiencing severe bullying at school. Even some of my teachers joined in on the bullying, and I'll talk about some of that later. But I grew up not being allowed to stand up for myself and afraid. I was fearful, extremely fearful of my mother's husband. And I was actually, fearful of people in general. And even as I became an adult, and finally escaped the parental home and out on my own, I still had some fear of my mother's husband whenever I visit their home. And um, he was nice to me because I turned out to be complete opposite of what he always told me I was going to be growing up. And I'll talk about that another time. But he had respect for me, but I still had a fear of him because I knew that he was the type person that if you wrong him in any way, it's over. Um, but my so several years ago, back in 2022, um, I noticed that my mother's health had started to decline. Now at the time I lived in Illinois, and they were still in Florida, which is where I'm from. Um, but I had noticed that my mother's health that Christmas 2021 had really taken a turn. She could hardly walk, but she still was focused on helping her son, and the woman he was with at the time and still is probably with her. But her life has always revolved around her son. Um, so I found out that she had been in a hospital in February 2022. And then right after that, her husband was in a really bad accident. And he turned out that he was at fault, the accident. He lost his license, suspended license for 3 months, and he had to take a safe driving course. Well, when I talked to him on the phone, after he had to go to court, he was a little confused about what they were telling him in court. So I looked up on the courthouse website, and I told him that he had license suspension and he had to take the 12-hour course. And so then later on, when I talked to him about it, he said that mother either couldn't or wouldn't help him take the course online. Now, he has zero tech skills. So he needs help with anything having to do with technology. In fact, that's one reason my mother was the one who handled all the finances, the bills, and writing checks, anything that had to do with finances and in electronics. So, and I will also say, share that he is a little bit illiterate. Well, he is illiterate. He um, didn't go beyond my seventh or eighth grade. Um, and so anyway, I told him that, I had noticed mother's health had, changed a lot, and that um, I'm concerned that maybe she is not remembering um, how to do things online. So I had offered to drive down there in that May of 2022 to help him take this course online, because the closest class in person was going to be an hour away. And if he couldn't drive and mother's health was declining, I knew that they needed help. So being the loyal daughter that I was, I drove down there, and I was very disturbed by my mother's condition. It had really changed a lot since December. And so he and I talked, and I was really impressed that he was opening up to me about things. And I told him that, I will do what I can to help. And, I can monitor their bank account. And now at this time, up to this point, I knew that my mother had been supporting their son. She would always deny it to me, but I knew that she was supporting him. And so, he started making my mother's husband started making comments, and I said, yes, I know that she does support him. She denies it. Well, I didn't even know the extent of what she was doing for her son until months later. But that May, I said, it might be a good idea to get your affairs in order, and maybe allow me access to your bank account so that I can monitor what's going on, since mother doesn't seem to be able to remember passwords, and or she's forgetting a lot of passwords. So fast forward to September, he called me irate that he had discovered that my mother had written a check to their son on her birthday in September 2022 when he wasn't at the house. So I called the bank. That was the day after her birthday. I called the bank, and their son had already cashed the check. And my mother's husband was extremely angry. And so there was a call made to the state for elder exploitation and abuse. And a social worker went out there and interviewed my mother, and he was disturbed by her condition and the condition of the home. So he called law enforcement. Well, they both called me, the law enforcement and the social worker, and I told them what I knew. Little did I know the extent of what their son had been doing. So I said, I will, plan to drive down there again within a couple of weeks. And so I drove down there in October 2022 and was able to get my mother into a specialist neurologist to figure out what's going on with her, why she's having difficulty with her memory and her mobility, why she could hardly walk. And while I was down there, Marvin, my mother's husband, also started finding a ton of evidence of how much my mother had been supporting their son. Now, back in September, I did pull a credit report on my mother and discovered that she had some heavy debt, several different credit cards, and they weren't even, that the debt was not even her debt. And I knew that it had to be her son. So with her sitting next to me during that month of October, giving me permission to talk to the credit card companies, I was able to get copies of statements and explain what was going on and close these accounts out, get them paid off. And it was definitely a chore. But throughout this time, my mother's husband was actually showing a lot more respect to me. He was being kind to me. He was really depending on me to get things done. And I was doing my best with the distance between us, that, being 1,000 miles apart, to keep up with things. And at this point, the law enforcement had told their son to stay away from his parents, because there was a lot of evidence of what he had been doing. Um, we couldn't press charges against him because mother had done all of this willingly. Um, so anyway, over the course of the next several months, throughout 2023, I think I drove down there like 4 times to take mother to appointments and get her hair cut, stuff that her husband wouldn't do or couldn't do or didn't feel comfortable doing, whatever his reason was. But during this time, I started letting my walls down a little bit and allowing myself to start feeling close to him, because he was being really nice to me and showing me a lot more respect and really depending on me, and my heart went out to him because he was learning just how much money their son had taken from them. It was really sad to see just how little money they had in their account. But so by the end of 2023, my mother's husband, he was at his wit's end, and he was wanting her out of the home. And because she was losing her hearing aids all the time, and she was flushing things down the toilet, and I know there was probably a lot of fighting, because that's how he is anyway. He yells at her. He abuses her. That's what he does. I'm just gonna say it. He abuses her. So I during the Christmas holidays of 2023, I toured several assisted living places and got my mother on a waiting list at one that her husband selected, that he liked better based on the cost and location. So we were able to get her moved in May 2024, and he seemed fine with it. He was agreeable, and I went over all the expenses and everything. He would have had plenty of money left over for himself to take care of whatever he needed at their home. So things seemed to be going well. I moved her in May, and then starting July, my mother's husband would call me, and his demeanor had changed. At first, I just kind of brushed it off. I knew he was feeling lonely, and I don't understand that, because he seemed to despise my mother, but he was lonely, and he had the dogs there. And then in August, he called me. Now he'd been calling me like every other day or so, and we'd talk. And then in August, one day he called me, and he was very agitated, and actually kind of made me, it did bring me to tears, because I didn't know what was going on. And I was hours away, and I couldn't see what was going on. And then he was kind of alluding to some things that he was saying. Well, his brother said that I shouldn't do this, I should do that. He's bringing his brother into the equation, a brother that he had never been close to until the months prior, because all their other siblings had passed away by then. Mid-August, he called me again, and this time he became very belligerent, and at one point hung up on me because I started talking back at him, starting to defend myself over the phone. Now, I had never been able to defend myself, because I was always too afraid to speak up for myself, especially with him. So I blocked him on my phone, because he just was not, he was just, I couldn't understand what was going on. I was very perplexed. And then I unblocked my phone and allowed him to call me, and I would call him, and he was being nice. And then he started being belligerent again. And I mean, it was like he was bipolar. So fast forward to September of 2024, month of my mother's birthday, I drove down there again, take my mother to her neurology appointment. And since it was her birthday, this time I paid for her haircut. And that was the day before her birthday. So I got her haircut, took her to neurologist. And then after her appointment, I asked her if she wanted to go by the home so that she could see the dogs and her husband. She's like, sure. So I pulled up to their home, and her husband met us out there, out at the car. But I could tell by his body language, something was up. And so he walked ahead of us back into the home while I helped my mother with her walker to get into this home, which is not safe for her at this point. And I got her into the home, and she sat down, and he brought her a cup of coffee. And when he set it down, he looks at me with the most evil eyes, more evil than I remember as a kid, and suddenly started accusing me of saying things and being a liar, and that Jimmy said, his brother said that I did this and did that. And I'm like, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And then he pulled out his phone and he shoved it in my face and forced me to listen to his brother call me liar over and over again. And when I asked his brother, what am I lying about? He couldn't tell me except to keep repeating, you're a liar, Sam. You're lying. Sam, you're a liar. You're a liar. And finally, I got tired of it, and I took the phone and I shoved it back towards my mother's husband. And I said, I don't even remember what I said to him, but I spoke up to him. I defended myself. And he didn't like that. He is the type of person that if you do him wrong, it's over. And so that made him really angry, and I was scared out of my mind. My heart was racing because you don't do that to him. And I had never done that to him in his face. That was the first time in my life that I had ever stood up for myself like that to his face. And so I said to my mother, I said, come on, I'm going to take you back to your apartment. And he said, no, you're not. And he wouldn't let me take her back to her apartment. He did return her to her apartment later that night, but I knew that it was likely the end of this relationship. And so, yeah, that was the last time that I saw my mother in person, because her husband has since cut off contact between me and her. He is accusing me of doing the very things that his son has done, and there is tons of evidence against his son of the exploitation, the manipulation, the gaslighting. I have my mother's cell phones, and I've gone through them, and I'm keeping them as evidence. So anyway, I found my voice that day, and as scary as it was empowering, and I've been working on being more bold since then and sticking up for myself. And I really hope that I can be a good example for my own kids to be able to stand up for themselves, which I believe they already are doing good with those skills anyway. So anyway, that is why I named my channel Finding My Voice, because I finally found my voice and I am going forward with it. Thank you for listening.